What if the Viltrumites existed in the DC universe? I feel like this is a concept and an idea that has just been waiting to have been made. Considering some of the crossover videos for Invincible and DC that I've made on this channel have talked about ideas of how the Viltrumites would be in the DC universe. Now, first and foremost, what the Viltrumites would be in the DC universe, I don't think would be any different than from what they are in the Invincible world. Their attitudes, their personalities, the prime function of what a Viltrumite is would stay the same. The things that will change is how the DC universe changes around them, and maybe more so who they will be in conflict with more often than not. The Viltrumite power standards are going to need to rise, and that's mainly because DC tends to be on a higher power scaling than other universes, such as Invincible. To make this all fair and for this to actually work, they should be on a level playing field with the rest of the DC world. So in the DC universe, where many extremely powerful species or forces exist, and all of them all hell-bent on power, control, and conquest, would the Viltrumites thrive, adapt, or be destroyed? Now, I think there are many ways that you can look at involving the Viltrumites into DC. However, these are the two options I think would be best. Option 1, Viltrum is a possible sister planet to Krypton, located in the same solar system. Or it's in a completely different solar system, where over the thousands of years of Kryptonian expansion, some of their people moved to this particular planet. Krypton and Viltrum would be descendants and ancestors to one another, in which evolution has treated both people somewhat differently, allowing for both species to be raised with different abilities and potentials. Yellow sunlight, red sunlight, Kryptonite rocks would have no effect, or at the very least not the same effects on Viltrumites the way they do on Kryptonians. Over the vast amount of years, Viltrumites will have developed to almost being their own species. Their ecosystem is far different than Krypton's. And at the very least explained in the Invincible comics, Viltrumites have something called smart atoms, and maybe this could be a very unique way to differentiate what Viltrumites are compared to Kryptonians. Maybe smart atoms is a way to give reason to why Viltrumites have power, whereas Kryptonians' reason is because of yellow sunlight. But the development or the discovery of smart atoms could be due to the possible intellectual expansion of these species, of the Viltrumites, becoming so intelligent that they unlocked their true power from scientific discovery. Or is it something they gained from existing on their planet long enough, a natural gift of sorts? Then option number 2 is Viltrumites could simply be their own species, similar to Kryptonians, but biologically, DNA-wise, there is literally no connection to them whatsoever. Basically, their power has been felt across the universe many times. Their reputation stands amongst some of the top species in the DC universe. Personally, I like option number 1 because it adds a lot more depth to these characters and future ways of telling stories. Option 2 is not bad either, but option 1 I think has more potential. No matter how you would involve them into the DC universe, I think what's most important is bringing out who would be threats to the Viltrumites, who the Viltrumites would be threats to, and just in general how the rest of the universe would see them. And you have to remember that kryptonite, red sunlight, the weaknesses to a Kryptonian won't have the same effect on a Viltrumite. So subduing them with a simple ray of light or a rock is not going to be an option. They will more or less be a threat to anybody they come across. However, Viltrumites don't ever have to deal, or at the very least not very often deal with people who can utilize magic or telepathy or telekinesis. The Invincible world does not have too much of that. So in terms of DC, where magic is rampant and we do have our fair share of telepathy and telekinesis characters, how would Viltrumites be able to handle that? So with that said, I imagine any world worth noting in DC's universe would have had run-ins and experiences with the Viltrumites before. If Kryptonians and Viltrumites are connected and related in any way, Viltrum could see themselves as the master race compared to the Kryptonians. The fact that they have natural power and abilities, and they don't require feeble sunlight to empower them. They already have the power within them. There could be possible relations with the Martians, and yes, I literally mean relations. The Viltrumites would use the Martians to create offsprings. This could be the start of how Viltrum would see what their offsprings would look like while coming from a different species. What powers would they now have? And if that other species has abilities of their own, how powerful would they be? Imagine the shape-shifting and telepathy of the Martians combined with the raw strength and power output of a Viltrumite. And which species holds the dominant gene? Would more children come out to be more Viltrumite looking or more other species looking? That would be a huge conversation for their empire, considering more often than not, they do prefer purebreds. In a time where the white Martians and the green Martians really just hate one another, there is a situation where Viltrum does ally themselves with the white Martians, considering they are the fighters of the species. But the joke would be on the white Martians, because after they're done with the green Martians, the Viltrumites would just enslave the white. Things like that could be the cornerstones of how the Viltrumites became so power hungry and how they created dominion over so many different homeworlds around the universe. There's potential contractual obligations and relationships between Viltrum and the new gods, and maybe even Darkseid. Depending on certain treaties they would have with the new gods, it could allow Viltrum to take ownership of other worlds, to create settlement, to continue to grow the empire they're trying to grow. I could definitely see anti-life equation being of interest to Viltrum. Now, whether or not Darkseid would own it at the time is debatable, but that does bring in a certain amount of conflict between both parties. Truly, the list goes on of what Viltrum could do to other worlds. Places like Thanagar and Tamarin and many other notable worlds will have had conflict with Viltrum at least one time before. However, I believe the main enemy of the Viltrumites would be the Guardians of the Universe. With them, of course, comes the Green Lantern Corps, but more than anything, I think they would be more of a nuisance to Viltrumites, whereas their main grudge, their priority, is the Guardians. Now, if we did look at it from the perspective where it is the present day of DC Comics, and the Viltrumites existed in DC, and they did only have 37 purebred warriors left in their entire empire. Perhaps the reasoning for this is because the Viltrumites were wiped out by the Guardians. In an act of extreme desperation, something the Guardians didn't even want to do, they were forced to annihilate the Viltrum Empire and basically their entire species. Going off of what distinguishes them from being different than everyone else in the DC universe, perhaps these smart atoms in the Viltrumites was the key to their defeat by the Guardians, and they perhaps crafted some sort of one-time use only weapon. There's no way to create this device again, or there's perhaps no way to use this device again. And when this kind of universal weapon enters the bloodstream of a Viltrumite and removes the smart atoms, it pretty much kills and disperses every part of what makes a Viltrumite a Viltrumite, killing off their species. That is how much of a danger the Viltrumites are to anybody around them. The fact that the Guardians of the Universe would stoop to this type of decision. The remaining survivors of Viltrum and with their leader, Thragg, would declare all-out war against the Guardians, in which he would say, we'll never stop fighting you, not until you are dead, or we are dead, or this whole universe is destroyed. This is where that crossbreeding with the Martians really comes into play. Now that they know it works, even though they do want a purebred empire, they would probably attempt to start mating with some other powerful species around the DC universe, at least for the interim, knowing that the more powerful beings they get on their side, the better chances they would have of getting to the Guardians and defeating them once and for all. But with this, they would become immediate threats to, of course, the Green Lanterns, especially characters like Hal Jordan, Jon Stewart, Kyle Rayner, and the rest of them, pretty much. There's even some really interesting ideas where Thragg could be interested in finding the lost city of Kandor, which would be in the possession of Brainiac at this time. Also keep in mind that even though Viltrumites are technically evil, they're villains, no hero or villain is pretty much safe from Viltrumites. As long as a Viltrumite is in their vicinity, anybody is at threat. It doesn't matter who. The possibility of mating with Kryptonians, knowing how powerful they can be with the power of the sun, would be very interesting to him. If we could reunite both of our ancestries back into one, imagine how powerful we would be. We would be a brand new Viltrumite empire, an empire that even our ancestors never thought we could have had. Now that would be a job for Superman to keep Kandor out of Thragg's hands, but I think Superman would also heavily be thrown into this whole plot of Viltrumite. If you're going to use Superman, that means you're going to have to use other very popular Kryptonians, such as Supergirl, and I think that would be a job for Conquest. Attempting to vet out Supergirl, to use her anger against Brainiac for what he did to Krypton, and to use that as the reason why she would channel all of her anger into the Guardians of the Universe. You have the power to stop bad from happening, yet you never did anything to help Krypton. Earth would definitely be a target of Thragg's when you consider how many super beings live on the planet, and with the fact that Superman does tend to favor Earth more than anything. And I'm also going to keep into consideration that Mark, Invincible, probably exists on Earth at this time as well. I think there would be a way where you could tie in the stories of the DC universe to fit how Nolan comes to Earth, has a son, and Mark trains him to become invincible. And the fact that there is already a Viltrumite presence on Earth at this time, it makes it a clear goal for Thragg. As I said earlier with the anti-life equation, Thragg's seeking it out, whether it does belong to Darkseid at this time or not, but that still makes him an immediate threat to Darkseid. With that power, he could make it so much easier to conquer worlds, which now could potentially make Darkseid a temporary ally. He would maybe be willing to work with certain characters and beings to stop the Viltrumites, because at the end of the day, nothing is as important to him as anti-life is. Once again, that is if he doesn't have it. If he does have it, you can probably bet Viltrumites would try and attack him for it here and there. But Superman, Supergirl, other members of the Superman family, those with powers that is, and then Green Lantern, Hal, John, Kyle, Jessica, the list goes on. It would bring both of these characters closer together, creating more allies that we've maybe never seen before, more bonds and friendships, and maybe even relationships of some sort. Then you also potentially bring Invincible into the fold. Now you have Mark Mark getting to know all of these heroes and all these characters, and how every single one of these people have to deal with Viltrumites, knowing that Green Lanterns have been at war with them for hundreds or thousands of years. Kryptonians being ancestors and descendants to them, ensuring that their species does not end up like theirs. And Mark needing to deal with the fact that he is half of these evil beings. And there's just so much you could do now with lore and world building and expansion. With all these interspecies connections, with Viltrumites having children with other aliens, all these brand new characters you could now create and develop, and what their potentials would be. Will they be good or bad, or maybe a bit of neutral? What type of unique abilities will they have that other characters won't? Overall, we know that the Viltrumites would be a bane to many existences, and most species would see them as a threat that must die. But someone like Mark could be a big question for characters like Superman, Green Lantern, and even the Guardians. Can people rise above their bloodline, even if their bloodline is tied to galactic alien genocide? Now, it would give the Viltrumites a chance to prove that no matter what world they're in, they will always be a threat, and they will always attempt to remain at the top of the food chain. But there you go, guys. What if Viltrumites existed in the DC universe? I know when people talk about DC and Invincible and Marvel, one of the very first and go-to subjects are Superman and Omni-Man and Thragg and Superman, Kryptonians and Viltrumites. And this is always a discussion, especially every single time a new season of Invincible drops, that I just wanted to talk about it. I've mentioned it so many times in other videos before, and I thought it would be good to have a video where we do go into more details about it. So you guys let me know in the comments below what you thought of some of my ideas, and what you guys think the Viltrumites would look like in the DC universe. Would they survive? Would they adapt? Or would they be destroyed? But with that being said, that is all I have for you on this one, everyone. So until the next time, I will talk to you all very soon.